Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Grace Hatfield from EHS Daily Advisor, and thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Faces of EHS. This is a segment where we feature environmental health and safety professionals and highlight their journeys and hear their thoughts about EHS trends and issues. Today, we are joined by Barry Nelson, who is the founder and CEO of Factor Lab. So, hi, Barry, how are you today?
Great. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So, can you tell us a little bit about your position at Factor Lab and what you guys do as a company?
Thanks. Yeah. Barry Nelson. I'm the CEO and founder of Factor Lab. And Factor Lab provides people centered applications in data science for continuous improvement and injury free operations.
Perfect. So let's jump right in. How did you get your start in EHS?
It's an interesting story. We had a company in 2000 where we were about at the kind of early stages of the internet, and one of our customers came to us and asked us if he was trying to win an award from Intel, and he wanted to know if which of his subcontractors was most likely to kill somebody, and he
Hmm.
wanted to know if we could use, believe it or not, back in those days, data science and this new invention that was coming out called the Palm Pilot. The Palm Pilot was the big precursor to the iPhone, but it was a mobile
Hmm.
device. And so we built the very first form on a mobile device. And in those days, they weren't even connected to the internet. So we built the first connection that connected up this device so that you could sync it with the internet so that someone can get a report. And it was the sort of the birthplace of forms, and maybe people are kind of cursing me for that, but safety forms on mobile devices that ended up being EHS reports. So that's how I got started.
Wow, that's really cool. So who was your biggest influence in the industry?
Well, there's a lot. You've been in it for that long, for this long. There's been a lot of people. I didn't in the early days. I didn't. Um, I don't. It's funny, you didn't know what you didn't know. So I think early on, people like Scott Geller was a huge influence on us because nobody told me about those days. It was about what are behaviors and the difference between behaviors and conditions. And so he really helped us begin to understand, or help me understand through his work. Do you know Scott Geller?
Yeah, is it E. Scott Geller?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so he's, there's lots of people who have different views on Scott, but he was, say what you will, he was an early pioneer in this space to help us understand, in the early days, what they used to call behavior-based safety or people-based safety, and and that was a big influence. But that also set the stage for others that helped us move on from there. So when we moved on to the Sidney Deckers and the Dr. James Reasons and those guys in the human error world, and then subsequent to that, the Todd Conklins of the world to help us understand it's really not about people and blaming people, but it's around the systems that support those people. And so, and then you're moving on from there, the people that are out there today that we really read a lot, like the Amy Edmondson, her work with psychological safety, and Alex Pentland at MIT and his work with social physics. So I'm influenced by a lot of folks that are both directly involved in the safety business, but a lot in the organizational design and leadership and culture. And so, what is this? How do we? If we've learned anything, by the way, at Factor Lab, it's really about the environment more than it is the activity. And so, if we can begin to measure, you build systems like we started out in the early days of building, like I built a form on a mobile device because I thought that that's what somebody asked me to do, really, and I didn't know any better. And then, that's evolved now to us better understanding that, well, what you might get off that form is not exactly what you're really looking for. It was a
Hmm.
clue, but it wasn't really what we looked for. And those folks that I rattled off are the ones who really helped me begin to understand, ah, this is what really matters. And we need to think differently about how we measure it.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's more to the picture. Um,
Uh,
so, what is your best mistake and what did you learn from it?
that's an interesting question. I think uh, my best mistake. I would I think a big mistake that I've learned from is, people used to tell me they wanted me to build them a system that would predict where their next accident or injury is coming from. And I believed that for a while because it makes sense, but it's not actually what they really want. What they really want is they want someone to go in and identify where maybe there's more risk of something about to happen, but actually give them the information or frankly do something to remove the risk.
Hmm.
Because it's one thing to just to tell someone, I can make you a chart that says this guy over here is, more risky than that guy, and I could be 100% accurate, but that doesn't really help you solve the problem. What people really want is a solution to the problem. That you do need to know which one is most at risk, of course. But really what you want to know is like, how do I make it better? And how do I know if I've made it better that it's actually staying better? So
Hmm.
I think that took me a long time to learn the lesson, and then also really how to answer that question.
Gotcha. So, what is your favorite and least favorite part about working in the industry, and would you change anything?
We're changing a lot. So my favorite part about working in the industry is clearly the people. We love our, this is
Hmm.
a unique. I'm sure a lot of people on this interview thing will answer this. I would hope a lot of them would do it. It takes a unique person to want to be. By the way, I'm not an EHS professional. I support EHS professionals. So that should be
Hmm.
really clear. But the EHS professional is it's an unsung hero, and they do this stuff. Most of them do this job out of their hearts and because they genuinely want to leave the world a little better place. And so it's great to be able to serve a group of people who are really trying to make a difference. So my favorite part about this is the fact that you get to work with people who are really trying to do something that leave things a little better than they were before. I think the most frustrating part is there's a lot of folks who are still getting their head around the fact that what we have been doing for the last 20 years is insufficient
Hmm.
and that we're living they're unable to they're not ready to admit yet that a lot of the information that's been collected and is tried to be used to protect people and reduce risk is actually a mirage.
Hmm.
It's the wrong data. It's not really that useful. Um, it is better than nothing for sure, but it's fundamentally um, uh, wrong. And if we
Hmm.
don't change the lens that we look at this problem, it will be difficult to imagine solutions that are different and more effective. Now, the good news is there's lots of people who are beginning to see that. But one of the frustrating parts is that there are still, I think, a lot of our folks in this industry who not quite ready to say, wow, yeah, I can admit that even though I said these things and I thought these things, they just didn't work out the way that I hoped they would. And by the way, I had to go through that myself, because
Hmm.
again, I put my kids through college making forms and charts that show,
Hmm.
more of these and less of those. And I'm realizing now that, like I say, they were better than nothing, but they weren't sufficient to help us solve the problems that we really need to solve.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on safety culture and how can company leaders make safety a value within their organizations?
It's an interesting question. Uh, so culture trumps everything. And the short answer to your question is show, don't say.
Hmm.
So executives, leaders uh, must show the organization through their actions, not through their words, and through their the way that they behave. They will communicate directly and indirectly what the field and those who are really closest to the work really need to know about culture. Um, and I think it's really not that complicated, but and people I think can make it more complicated than it needs to be. But um, there's a bunch of research on this, by the way. Um, and this Pentland from MIT talks about it. It's less about what people say, and it is more about how people say it that
Mm-hmm.
really matters. And what's changed is our ability to measure those things
Mm-hmm.
is now available where it wasn't previously. So we can objectively, through math, understand and begin to measure things that we could never even imagine before. And that, I think, will help leaders understand what they think they understand today, but they don't quite get because they can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's going to, I think we're, by the way, I believe we're on the cusp of significant change in how we think about, measure, understand, and accelerate cultural change as a result of that work.
Absolutely, yeah. So, what safety concerns or issues do you think need more prioritization in safety programs?
We need to quit wasting our time asking people to collect and give us information that is of zero value to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some examples of that information that needs to get thrown out?
Pencil whipped inspections, people filling out forms, people collecting symptoms instead of problems. Um, we have to move from this world of begging and pleading for people to give us any information and being delighted that we could just get anything to
Hmm.
a world where we're making it very easy for people to give us the natural language of how they do their work, right? And
Hmm.
and begin to think about um, how we listen to them do work as opposed to have them do a performance for us in the form of
Hmm.
filling out a form or doing a talk or something that's not genuine and authentic, right? And we need to
Yeah.
help people think about how do we transition what we ask people to share with us from tell me what you found and what you fixed to tell me what you saw and what you learned and what we need to do to prevent it. But that's a mind shift, significant mind shift in the tools available and how we've done them. These form-based applications that were used before to do it, primarily form-based applications before, they have to evolve to allow safety professionals and others in the field to collect this information, and you have to use data science in order to be able to understand that information.
Absolutely, yeah. So, what will be the impact of environmental, social, and governance principles on the EHS industry?
I think, I'm not an expert in those principles, so I don't know if I'm an authority on it. But what I will tell you is that they're a cousin to culture, and
Mhm.
those things are reflected. Like society as a whole is raising the bar and changing the expectations of how we behave and how we interact with one another. We're becoming more informed, and we're becoming better educated, and we're becoming more sensitive to these things. And I believe that that stuff will manifest itself in the language that we use when we communicate with each other. So those things exist outside of EHS. But what we're going to be doing with is we're going to be listening to seeing whether or not how fast, how pervasive, how clear, how well are those things talked about in the natural course of language when we communicate each other doing our work. And it'll be a very interesting exercise to understand is it do organizations who, let's say, embrace those concepts, do they in fact truly have higher performing teams, make more money,
Mhm.
and have less accidents and injuries? And I believe the answer to that will be yes. We'll have to let the data support it, but when that's the case, I think we'll see accelerated adoption of those principles.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's that show not tell kind of mentality, right?
Exactly.
Um, yeah, so how will new safety technologies influence the work being done by safety professionals?
Yeah, as you can see, I'm talking about that a little bit, but I believe, there's a whole bunch of things in there. We're at a what I would argue is probably the biggest transformative step, certainly in the last 25 years since the invention of the internet with technology. We're moving away from structured data to unstructured information. We're moving away from charts and graphs that people look at to machines helping us understand information in ways that were humanly not possible. I'll give you an example. I told you earlier, a generic answer of what we do. The big thing that we do is we use technology to allow people to capture natural conversations in the workplace. So you can record, as an example, your daily planning conversation or your daily pre-task planning
Mm,
conversation or whatever. It doesn't matter what the activity is.
mhm,
But what we do that's different than everybody else is we say, I don't care what hazards you talk about. I don't care about what controls you talk about. I care about things like, um, do you care about the
mhm,
people you're talking to? Do they
mhm,
respect you? Do you respect each other? Or are you having an authentic conversation? Is it real participation between people? Are they really engaged? Is this a performance, or are you doing this for me? Are you doing this for somebody else?
mhm,
And so by the way, the fact that we could collect that information and we would even want to collect that information is transformative because that people just like now they're filling out forms and doing stupid pencil whip things that are a colossal waste of time. But anyway, listening to those conversations is really, really interesting, but you can only listen to whatever, one or two or three. And by the way, it's only so much that you can listen to.
mhm,
What can machines do? Machines can listen to tens hundreds of thousands of these conversations and set them up on 7 different dimensions and then organize them by ones that are similar to each other so that you can begin to see like, yeah, well, how do my how do my better leaders create an environment where there's a more respectful conversation between people? Like, what is that? And then now I have the video to see
mhm,
that, to understand it myself, and to begin to see how to share that with others. So now I've moved an activity from being something that was filled out on a piece of a form and maybe somebody had a conversation or didn't, to now they're doing technologies allow me to do the same thing. I'm just capturing a different piece of information. I'm looking at it through a different lens. I'm organizing it with math, and I've created content that I can use to help other people actually understand what it is that I really want.
mhm,
That, as you go back to what I was saying before, that's where the transformation happens. I don't want to know whether or not I have a I mean, I do want to know if I have a job set that's more at risk of one or it's another. But what do I really want to know? I really want to know if people are having the kinds of conversations that they need to have on the job sites that are less likely to have accidents and injuries because having those conversations is what really leads to the fact that you're going to be more at risk or not. As an example, you follow? So
mhm,
it's not for the fact that I could just tell you that you had a terrible conversation so you're more at risk. Create content that you can use to help your people understand what it is that you really want. Show them, don't tell them. Use technology to let
absolutely.
leaders actually show up and participate in conversations so that they can show them. And so, how do the 7 leaders that are more effective in the organization engage their people versus the 7 leaders who engage their people less? How are they different or the same? And what do we see? And how do we create dialogue and discourse in the organization? This is an example of how technology is going to change. And I mean, I can go on. It's the whole world of generative and how we're going to how
Yeah.
I don't know where you're at. Have you talked to anybody yet about how people are going to be interface how humans and interfacing with safety information yet?
I've had a few people on who talk about it. A lot of the stuff we've been covering are things like wearables and like AI that can help assist, like monitor like bodily function in the field and things like that to help people kind of monitor like their heat levels and things like that. But yeah, lots of data collection things as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah, this is saying that's good, no problem with that stuff. What I'm suggesting is I'm telling you where this is going is like
Hmm.
today, if I want to know Grace is if I want to know if Grace is doing a good job or not, I'm going to go look at a chart, right?
Hmm.
Just, did more of these or less of those or higher quality this or that, right? Or did she see this or that? Not anymore. In the very
Yeah.
near future, I'm going to simply ask a machine, is Grace getting
Yeah.
better? And the machine is going to say, Grace getting better at what? And you're going to say, is Grace having more effective conversations this week? Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, there'll be a model that'll be behind that. She'll say she's having more well, based on the model that you built, right? People are participating more. She's talking about more hazards. So the whole way that we consume knowledge and expect knowledge and participate and create knowledge is fundamentally changing.
Hmm.
Uh, because of these advances in technology that are happening in parallel to our industry. So
Yeah.
it's by the way, let's say that let's how would you organize today? Imagine this one, great. If I said I want you to organize every single podcast that you've done on the three most effective dimensions that you think the audience likes the most.
Hmm.
That's happening. So it's the
Wow.
same thing.
Yeah.
Imagine I could organize 50,000 pre-test daily plans or 10,000 observations that were just unstructured information on whatever dimension that I want.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I could say, well, that's sort of interesting, and I don't like that dimension. Maybe I want to try something else. Yeah,
Wow.
this will fundamentally change and allow and free up the imagination of safety leaders to think about what data do I want to collect and how do I want to organize it. And then what questions am I going to ask of it? And what questions will it ask of me?
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I've heard a lot of is like you got to know how to talk to the AI. They'll give you information, but you kind of have to know how to ask it a question that's going to yield the data that you want.
That used to be harder than it's going to be. Let me just say
Yeah.
that is for sure true in some contexts, but I think some of those barriers are rapidly coming down. And again, in
Yeah.
advancements that are much, much bigger than our EHS profession. Sometimes we're always the
Hmm.
last to eat. This time, I think, by the way, EHS is going to be front and center. We're going to be
Hmm.
leading. We are leading. I think others who are outside of our industry in the application of some of this science, but we're benefiting from these big workhorses of the Metas and the Googles and the AWSs of the world who are pouring jillions and the open AIs who are pouring
Yeah.
jillions and jillions of dollars into these tools that we can apply in our space.
Yeah. So the example you gave of, like asking a machine, like, is this person doing better? What do you think the timeline on that is going to be? Like, when do you think we'll get to a point like that?
Measured in months.
Wow. Yeah.
It's being worked on now. Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
it is, yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah, without if you had more time, we could talk more about it, but yeah, for sure. Yeah, and again, it's because of this convergence of technologies. If we had to build everything from scr if one had to build everything from scratch, it wouldn't be possible, but many of the
Mhm.
pieces exist, and this goes back to my comment earlier. It's about our imagination as a space, and
Mhm.
if we're just satisfied with what we have, and many, many, many people are not, of course, but,
Mhm.
my challenge to the leaders who might be listening to this, the people who are responsible, give yourself freedom to expect more
Mhm.
because it's possible now. It is a time when we
Absolutely.
get to imagine. We don't have to be hung up with some of these old problems. There are different lenses that we can look at them through and begin to imagine solutions. And we were talking about, you gave us one example, or we were just talking through this one example, but the there are many, 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 many examples. It is only limited by our imagination.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, as you kind of mentioned earlier, there's a lot of hesitation among safety professionals to kind of let go of, I guess, like the old way of doing things? Do you think that that will kind of impede the progress of some of the technology, or do you think there are like privacy concerns with some of that kind of technology?
Well, there's you got two different questions in there, and so let me buff them.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, two different, but both important questions. So let's take the privacy stuff. For sure, you have to be careful. You need to build a secure
Mhm.
world where you're going to do all this. You're not just dumping your stuff into OpenAI. By the way, anybody who hears this, do not do that.
Yeah.
But you should be working with a partner or whatever you want to call them, your organization, to build a private version of all these things so that you can do that, and that's all possible. So,
Mhm.
so privacy, you got to be maintained. That it's super important. That's it. But I don't think that's not a that is that's being dealt with. That can be dealt with. There's lots of infrastructure to make sure that's possible. But the
Mhm.
bigger problem that you point out is endemic to this space. And
Mhm.
again, this EHS professional is a thankless job in many cases.
Yes. Yeah.
It is, and they are, and I say this with love, but too often the risk of them making a mistake is perceived to be too high. I can't be
Mhm.
wrong. I worked so hard to convince the organization that this chart was the be all end all chart. I worked so hard to
Mhm.
beg people to give me these observations and to do this stuff. The thought that I would have to go back to the organization and say, God forbid, I didn't quite get it right, is a pretty steep ask. Because by the way,
Yeah.
these cultures that they work in don't make it easy for them to do that. Now, there's some that do, which is obviously the places where you're going to have your innovation. But
Mhm.
what I'm telling the what I would my message to the EHS, and so that, by the way, does impede growth. And there's a lot of people who are in that position. It's like, dude, I'm just trying to do my job. I just got to get this done.
Yeah.
I'm just delighted that I got a chart. I could give somebody to give me something. Please don't make me do something else. Particularly, by the way, they've also been sold a bill of goods by a bunch of technology people who've also let them down. Right? They
Mhm.
built crap. Nobody will use it. And they don't tell the truth about it. So that's, all that sort of mix in the soup, and people, there's a lot of skepticism, and it's well founded for those reasons. However, I go back to this point, if you look at where we are, we're at this real inflection point. We can the real truth is you got to listen to your people. It is unstructured information that matters. You do
Mhm.
need to create an environment where you can use data science to listen to lots of different things and to let you look at these problems differently. There are ways to do it where you don't have to bite off too much. You don't have to take the organization down some path. You can just go listen. Just that would be my thing. Just go listen to a few conversations and
Yeah.
play around with some of these things so that they can reduce that perceived risk, and they can begin to imagine a different future and begin to see themselves in a different lens. And the irony of it is, what I'm finding is the EHS professional's role is fundamentally changing for the better. Those leaders who were saying, I'm not going to keep doing this stupid stuff. I'm not going to keep asking people to give me information I'm not going to use. I'm actually going to reflip this, make it simpler, collect information we're really going to use some of these tools. They are now changing the nature of the relationship that they have with operations, which actually gives them more power, reduces risk, and creates an environment where they can be heard much more clearly. Because fundamentally, what the issue is, there's a disconnect between what safety thinks the operations hears and what
Mhm.
operations actually hears. And that is a problem that creates risk and creates problems and creates lack of engagement and lots of other issues. So, long answer to your question.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So to kind of pivot back to you personally, what are you most proud of?
Um, I think that's an interesting question as well. I have had the benefit of watching, seeing dozens of our customers get recognized or win awards for the things that they've done to help their organizations um, transform, get better, have dramatic impacts on their accidents and injuries. And those leaders um, have made a real lasting difference on not only their companies and their professional lives, but lots of people that we'll never know anything about. And we don't take any credit for that, but it is a source of pride to know that we did a little something to help them do what they needed to do to help those people.
Yeah, that's a great thing to be proud of. So my final question for you is, do you have any advice for people entering the profession?
For sure. Um, uh, I think it's a great time to be coming into this profession because it's of this transformation. So the uh, do not accept this state. Don't accept that we have to collect information from people and not use it. Don't accept that we need to have these stupid processes just because we've had them and somebody needs to give us information because we thought we needed it or whatever. Challenge and seek to serve. Listen, use technology to listen to people, and then build tools and imagine solutions and figure out AI and apply this whole new generation of technology to truly move us forward as an industry. We need that fresh imagination and perspective and energy to help us um, build upon what worked and tear down the stuff that was merely a mirage.
Absolutely, that's great advice. So thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity to get to know you and hear your insights, and I'm sure our audience is going to be really excited to hear everything you have to say.
Thanks for letting me do it.